Welcome to the online MOOC course on software engineering. In this lecture, we'll look into managing changing requirements. So, agenda of this lecture is going to be 1. Change drivers. So, what makes the requirements to change? Second is the traceability matrix and its types. Third is going to be the validation loops. Fourth, the governance and metrics associated. And fifth is going to be the action plan that could be adopted. The first topic, why the requirements evolve. What is the need for changing requirements? So, that is the main agenda for this lecture. So, basically when there is a market shift, when there is a change in the market, the requirements tends to change. The second is the new regulations, the competitive moves. So, when there is a competitor with respect to the same product, the competition across the same product will also makes the requirements to evolve. The stakeholders feedback. So, stakeholder is a person who is interested in the project. So, the feedback from the stakeholder is also going to produce new requirements. The technology breakthroughs. So, whenever there is a change in technology, again the requirements may evolve. So, these are some of the reasons which tend the requirements to change. So, the requirements are going to be the inputs to a particular project, and they get changed during the software development cycle or after the product has completed and it is in production. Okay. So, our intention has to be in recognizing these forces, these market shifts or regulations or competitive moves, everything has to be recognized much early, and we have to make sure that we do a advancement in identifying these requirements rather than doing it in a reactive manner. So, that is very important. Main thing with respect to the requirements evolving is going to be with respect to the market shift, the regulatory changes and the stakeholder feedback, where the stakeholder feedback is having much more priority when compared. Why? Because the stakeholders are the person who has given the project or going to use the project. So, they have much more importance with respect to this requirements and its involvement. So, the cost of late change is very important. So, when there is a change in requirements, obviously there will be a change in all the phases that we encounter at the rear. Okay. So, if you have identified the change in the requirements in the early stage, it is going to cost less when compared you identifying it at the later stages. Okay. So, this slide is going to depict the same. So, when the requirements change is identified at the requirements phase. So, we have already identified that we have 4 main phases in software engineering. One is the requirements phase, second is the design, third is going to be the coding phase or implementation phase, and fourth is going to be the testing phase, right. So, in traditional models, the order has to be intact. So, you can move to the stage 2 when you have only completed stage 1. But in the later models like agile and iterative models, there is a possibility of moving the phases here and there. Okay. So, this slide talks about the importance in identifying the change in requirements at what stage. Okay. So, if the change in requirement is identified at the requirements analysis phase, the cost is going to be 1x. Why? Because you have already identified in the requirements phase itself, and that is going to prolong in the future phases. Second, if you have identified the change in the design phase. So, what exactly is design phase? It is a phase where we are trying to model how to implement the requirement, right. So, if you are trying to identify the change in the design phase, probably you have to move on to the requirements phase and do the checking and come back again. So, this will create a cost. Okay. And again, if a requirement is going to change, it may impact further other requirements also. So obviously there is going to be a huge impact in cost. So when you have identified the change in requirements at the design phase, the cost that is going to incur is going to be 5x. Okay, it is multiplied by 5. The third, in case if you are trying to identify only at the implementation level, you have to redo all the prior phases. Obviously, the design requirements has to be rewritten for at least a particular set of modules. Again, that is going to incur cost, and probably during the requirement analysis phase itself, in parallel, testers also would have written the test cases. So that also needs some change. So when you are trying to identify at the coding level, coding phase, the cost that is going to incur is multiplied by 10. Okay, so it is like when you are within the software development life cycle. So all these first 3 is within your software development life cycle. Okay, but the final one that has been given in this post release phase is where you have done the entire project and you have delivered the project to the customer. So at that corresponding time, if you are trying to identify that there is a change in requirement, it is going to cost very much. It is going to be in the range of 50 to 100x more than what if you have identified earlier. Okay, so this slide is trying to give you the importance in the level of cost that is going to incur if you fail to adjust to the change in requirements. So we'll take a scenario. So it is like there is a retail shop. So the retail shop has identified that its competitor is going to offer a same day delivery, which is not available in this corresponding online retailer shop. Okay, so this is going to be an issue, and this is going to be a issue identified at the later point of time. So they are not getting that much amount of orders. So this is now a requirement that you have to deliver on the same day. Okay, so for that, what is going to be the procedure? Okay, so the project owner, he creates a new epic or a user story. So user story is a word that we have learned earlier. So it is named as epic here. So they create a user story for delivering at the same day. The change control board, CCB is the change control board. So change control board will assess what is actually the problem. Okay, so it is basically some integrations with the courier services which has actually created the problem. With respect to the change control, the links are exposed in such a way that they have to check with respect to the inventory and the checkout systems. So we are trying to identify the traceability. So which means that there is an issue, and that issue is being traced to what all causes. Okay, so that causes is actually the problem with respect to the checkout and inventories, and based on the things identified, there will be another sprint goal in the sense it will be assuming it as agile process is being taken care, a new implementation will be created and that will be renegotiated, and the work will begin within the next fewer time. Okay, so the basic idea with respect to this example is that a user or the stakeholder, so here the stakeholder is going to be the online retailer, right? So the stakeholder has identified a requirement which is not listed earlier, but it is identified after some time. Okay, so based on the new requirement, so this is the new requirement. Okay, so based on the new requirement, a new user story has been identified and it has to be checked with all the available prior modules. So for that, we'll go for the traceability and identify where all it is linked, and based on that links, the checking will be done, a sprint goal will be created and the implementation proceeds. Okay. So next is going to be the traceability tactics. So basically what exactly is traceability? So when you have a set of requirements. So, assume that you have functional requirement and non-functional requirement. So, these are the basic types. So, one is the functional requirement, second is the non-functional requirement. So, functional requirement is aligned with the project. Okay. So, non-functional requirement is the other requirements apart from the functionality we are going to associate. Say for example, security is going to be one non-functional requirement. Availability could be another non-functional requirement. So, assume that we take a simple example like student mark analysis or a exam application, okay, where the corresponding user has to be displayed with some information which belongs to that corresponding user alone, okay, which means that security has to be imparted, okay, and whenever the user needs to interact with the system should provide some details. So, that is what we call it as availability, okay. So, apart from providing the functionality, the other functions which is going to ease the use of that corresponding project are called as non-functional requirements, okay. So, in a corresponding project there could be a set of functional requirements and a set of non-functional requirements. So, assume that in a project there is functional requirement 1 to say functional requirement 10 and non-functional requirement 1 to 5. Okay. So, put together I have 15 requirements. If there is a change requirement comes into picture CR1, okay. So, this change requirement cannot be just taken as additional functional requirement or an additional non-functional requirement. We have to make sure that this change requirement is having any impact with the already available functional requirement or not, already available non-functional requirement or not. Okay, so that is the idea. So, whenever there is a business goal, a corresponding user story will be created and a set of code modules for that corresponding user story will be created and a test case to check whether the functionality is working correctly or not. Okay. So, all these 4 will be created. Okay. And there will be something called as a traceability matrix where you will be having a functional requirement 1, functional requirement 2 up to functional requirement 10 in our case. Functional requirement 1 to functional requirement 10. Okay. So, this is going to be a traceability matrix where say for example, if I have an impact over here, what it actually says is when you change functional requirement 2, it will correspondingly change or influence something in functional requirement 10. Okay. So, whenever you have a change in requirement, you have to come to this traceability matrix, add that as a change in requirement or it can be now a functional requirement 11. Assuming it has functional requirement, you have to check whether it is going to have any influence with respect to all the available functional requirements. Okay. So, if you have something, obviously say for example, I'll include for this functional requirement. Okay. So, here I have some impact and this have some impact, some 7 or something. Okay. So, we have to make sure that when you add this change in requirement as a functional requirement 11, it is having an impact with functional requirement 1 and 7. So, correspondingly some change has to be introduced to make sure this change will not affect the already available modules. Okay, so that is actually called as your traceability matrix or traceability lattice. Okay, earlier traditionally we have a traceability matrix, more probably the Excel sheet kind of a software which will be used as a static traceability matrix. So at times when there is a negligence in work, the traceability could be missed and it may be unnoticed also. Okay, so that is overcome by using something called as living traceability matrix, which is dynamic. Okay, so our idea is to avoid this static spreadsheets, static Excel sheets, and go forward with a dynamic matrix which is integrated to some available tools. Okay, so that if there is any change, the traceability will keep they'll be alive and accurate, and it is trying to make sure everything is intact. Okay, so there are many tools available, like there is something called as Jira, as Azure DevOps, which could be embedded within our tool, and we can make sure to have a live traceability matrix. And whenever there is a commit, so we have understood what we mean by commit. So commit is some changes that we have done in a particular module and we have uploaded that code in the repository. So when there is a commit, you have to make sure that commit has not done any issues with respect to already available existing modules. Okay, and again when there is a pull request, so what we mean by pull request here, you are trying to take some module from the repository and you have in the intention of changing or updating, and you will commit back. Okay, so there will be a link for both committing, meaning uploading back to the repository, and also retrieving from the repository. Okay, and this is going to be in real time sync with the matrix. So what are needed when you want to version? So versioning is again related. Why? Because the set of requirements that you might have started may with respect to the baseline system. As and when the requirements gets increased or it gets updated, you can version them such that it is when there is a problem or if there is any back propagation that is needed, you can always go back to the prior stable stage. Okay, so this is very important. So versioning will provide a very clear history of what has been added, what has been updated, what has been deleted, and it is also trying to provide accountability. Why? Because versioning will add who has made the change. So you cannot directly go and change anything. There is a set of procedures, authentication things and all with which this is made vital. So versioning will have a unique ID, identification, probably for tracking. The author, so as I said, the accountability, so author and state, which actually provide a clear ownership of who has done the updation and what they have changed. So it is going to have the log of all the modifications. So what is log? All possible changes that you have done. If you have added, if you have done some update, if you have done some deletion, everything with respect to a particular timestamp. Okay, so everything will be updated in a log, in a file. Okay, so baselines, as I have said, so baseline is the is a set of modules that is the base of that corresponding software or product, and when you move on top, when you add on top, it is going to be the next version. Okay, so some are called as boundaries. Another example with respect to a medical app. So assume that health app is going to be HIPAA compliant. So HIPAA compliant in the sense, when you are going to deal with health related applications, we have to make sure all the data that is available in that application should be highly secure and it should not be available to general public. Okay, so in that case, every user story that you have, it should be traced to a specific HIPAA clause. Okay, and the requirement update is something like when there is a change in the encryption standards, they are to be revised by the regulators. So if any problem arise or with respect to the change in the requirement, the traceability matrix will highlight, because we have already automated that. Okay, so it will affect which all requirement has that problems, whatever stories are affected, whatever test cases are affected, everything will be identified in the matrix, and that get instant impact analysis. Okay, so since everything is going to be in a very less time, obviously we will be having a rapid estimation. So rework has to be calculated. Rework estimation time will be calculated within minutes, and it is going to save the critical time, because obviously it is a medical application. So validation of the requirement is again very important. So it is something like every week you can go for a continuous review. So it is basically to identify whether we are working in the correct pace. Okay, so it is not only Friday, it could be any day, but normally in organization they prefer Friday to be a demo day. Okay, so they progress the progress has been showcased to all the key stakeholders who are interested in that corresponding project. They will collect all the feedback and they prepare a checklist. Okay, and the checklist will be they can also use the checklist for clarity, so that every feedback are genuinely collected. And obviously whenever you have multiple feedbacks, which one to work for is identified by prioritization. So ranking will be done with respect to this feedback, and whichever is going to have high probability and high impact, it will be taken for the next sprint. So next possible implementation. So acceptance test driven development. So this is very common in agile processing, where we will be having this executionable test cases which is implemented or which is written using Gherkin. So Gherkin is one software which is used to write the executable specification. So even before you try to implement, we can write test cases. The requirements document is actually the input. So you can start writing the executable test cases for acceptance using Gherkin or any other available software. Whenever the test passes, the requirements gets validated. Okay, so when you have this TDD in practice, TDD also becomes as a specification. We have seen in the prior classes something like you will have an example also in the specification, so that during implementation itself the same example could be used to check whether it is working fine or not. Okay, so this acts as a living documentation. It also becomes a specification also. It is having a guaranteed traceability to check from the user story to the test result. Okay, and since we have this built-in validation, we will have a high level of confidence such that the code that is going to be delivered is meeting the requirements at the greater extent. And lastly, whenever you are trying to do some changes in requirements, when you accept some change in requirements, it is very much important that you need a stakeholders approval. Okay, so that is called as the digital audit trail, where we try to capture all the signatures, timestamp when they have given that requirement, and so that it is going to be an agreement and it is not, and it may not be indisputable. Any change in requirement will have an approval at least with a digital signature if they are not available in person. Okay, And the timestamp is also very, very important, because when you have given the change in requirement has influence in cost. We have learned that in the first slide itself. So the timestamp is again a very important thing, and why they need the rationale behind the changing requirements is also going to provide a much higher impact. So that is also been recorded, and to which version you are going to link this CR, change in requirement, whether we are going to integrate in the current version, current project itself, or we are going to add that as a future requirement in the next version. So which version we are going to work on with respect to this CR is what is written over here. So when you have all this in the clear picture in a written document, it is going to provide a very clear notion between the organization, customer, and also the stakeholders, whoever is interested. Okay, it is going to provide a very, very clear audit trail. So this is again an example of some fintech company. Say for example, somebody has been invited to do a mid-sprint review. So you are in a mid of a sprint, a work with respect to a particular project, a module, where a new compliance officer has been invited to check for some critical flaws. Okay, so this compliance officer could be a stakeholder, any stakeholder with respect to that project. So they'll attend the sprint demo and they'll do all the acceptance test. So who normally does your acceptance test? It is your customer. So probably the stakeholder is going to be your customer. Okay, so an acceptance test for the multi-factor authentication. If say for example you have a multi-factor authentication module, and if that fails, the team will fix that issue within the same sprint itself, and they'll be approving that corresponding change, and they'll go for and they'll check and approve such that it is not going to create a post release patch. Okay, so this is done as and when. So meaning within the sprint meeting itself, you are trying to deliver a fix so that it is not going to create the later issue. So who actually checks for this change in request? Okay, so there is a team called as Change Control Board, CCB. Okay, so they will be experienced and they will be having a very good domain knowledge with respect to this project, and they provide clear, fast decision on this requirements change. So it is not that whenever a stakeholder turns up with a change in request, they will take all of a sudden. It will go to the change control board. They will check for all possibilities, whether it is feasible, whether you can do it within that corresponding time. Everything will be checked. So everything will be checked, and once everybody is okay, then they will consider that as a change request. So who will be in the core team? The product owner, the architect, and the QA lead. Okay, quality assurance lead. So how often they do this meeting? They at least meet twice weekly for this rapid decision making. So they will actually classify the change in request that they have got from the stakeholders as either urgent, deferable, or rejected. So what is urgent? So it is going to be the change request. It is going to be the change request where you have to do that in the same release. It is very urgent. It is functionally vital. Deferable, you can wait for at least next version. Rejected, meaning you are not going to consider that change request. So traceability coverage KPI. So here, when there is a set of requirements, so we have listed in the prior slides. Say for example, you have functional requirements and non-functional requirements, right? So functional requirements will be in a particular list, say for example 1 to 10, and non-functional requirements say 1 to 5. So this is the same example that we have taken earlier. So whenever you have a change request, it could be either a functional requirement or a non-functional requirement. So everything will be taken as a list, and we have to make sure it is completed at the speculated time. Okay. So normally a dashboard will be created where you will be having 3 signals: red, amber and green. So red in the sense it is not yet started, amber it is in progress, and green it is completed. So it will, when you have a dashboard like that, the coverage of the entire requirements, we can make sure how much we have done with respect to that software. Okay. So currently how much coverage and what is going to be the target, so that when the dashboard is in front of a team, they'll be getting motivated and make sure they can close the gaps before release. Okay. And normally it is not that they'll start from the first requirements and proceed to 10. They can take it in any order, but at the end all the functional requirements and all the non-functional requirements has to be completed with 100% coverage. So this is another example with respect to a automotive supplier. So they have tracked that across there are some 1200 safety requirements, and they have to ensure this ISO compliance. Okay. So assume there is a automatic driving assistance systems. So when there is a automatic driving assisting systems, there will be much level of safety requirements. So for safety they have some 1200 plus safety requirements. So assume the size of your state traceability matrix. So we just had 10 cross 10. So 10 cross 10 is going to have functional requirement 1 to 10. Here functional requirement 1 to 10. Okay. So now the requirement itself is 1200. Okay. So here also you have 1200. Just think about the matrix. So if you have a static spreadsheet, it is going to be much complex and it is very huge to track the changes. So adopting some tools like Jira and other DevOps tool, it could be much better. If you have some tools like that, from the dashboard you can, if there is 15% gap in the user stories, we have to mention, we can identify that there are some gaps, and some focused review with respect to specific modules is needed, can be identified. So everything could be taken care and make sure that it is compliance to the ISO standard. When you want to have a plan for this requirements traceability and validation, it could be in 3 stages. So first we have to configure. We have to start and configure. Second stage is training and establishing. Third stage is running that and redefine if we want. So in the pilot and configure stage, we will take a particular pilot project and try to configure everything in the tool. Okay. So as I said, when you have 10 requirements, you have to add in those requirements inside that tool. So that is what we call it as configuring. So how much ever functional requirements and non-functional requirements you have, everything has to be configured in a corresponding tool. Okay. So that is what we call it as configuration. Second is train and establish, where we have to train the teams and establish the traceability rule. So traceability rules are something like when there is a change in one functional requirement, whether it is going to influence in another functional requirement or not, or in any other non-functional requirement or not. Okay. So this is what is the idea. So that impact will be like high, low, medium, something like that. So that rules has to be established, and the training for establishing that rules will also be given in the second phase. In the third phase, we execute the validation reviews and check whether it is correctly done or not. Okay. So validation is like you have the requirements and whether the requirements has been carefully carried out or not is being validated, and if necessary we could also refine the metrics. Summary. So basically when we have requirements requirements are going to be the inputs from the stakeholders, which is going to tell you what exactly they need from the software product that is being developed. So, we have to make sure that the requirement process is disciplined, transparent and in user control. Okay. So, there is a necessity of bi-directional link wherein the every requirement has a parent business goal and a child checklist test case. Okay. So, meaning when you have a requirement, so the requirement should be aligned to the business goal and this requirement will be validated through a test case. Okay. So, both are necessary. A requirement should be aligned to the vision and mission statement of the organization. So, this is very important. Second is stakeholder approval. So, when there is a change in requirement, we have to make sure there is a digital audit trail so that whatever change in requirements are stated by the stakeholder are carefully written with the timestamp and their corresponding digital signature. Okay, and to which release, to which version they want this change in requirement. So, that is the second point. And the impact analysis. So, whenever you have a change request, you have to make sure that whether it is going to impact in a severe manner or catastrophic manner or it is a negligible change in request. So, based on that we can go forward whether we can take the request or not. And the KPI review, it states that the traceability coverage has to be reviewed weekly to sustain the discipline. Okay. So, this completes the change in requirements and traceability matrix overview. Thank you.